or I've gone on a leap here.
To be honest,
I've gone on a wild leap. Hey everyone, and welcome back to OxPod, Conversations with Students at the University of Oxford. Today I'm joined by Luther once again. He's a second-year experimental psychologist at St. Cat's College, and today we discussed life at Oxford, life before Oxford, and the exams coming up. We also talked about philosophy, old and new. We talked about free will, determinism, and the biology that surrounds that, and also expressed the views at our lectures on behavioral neuroscience and where we might have a slight difference of opinion and how there might actually be a basis in philosophy for free will and why it might lead to a better life. We also talked about geniuses, the OG psychologists who you won't see on the syllabus at Oxford, James, Frankl, Jung, very far apart from science by today's standards, but very interesting, and it made for a great dialogue. And lastly, we talked about how humans are burritos, essentially, and how psychoanalysis might be connected to water drinking. Overall, it is a really interesting episode, and I had a great time interviewing Luther once again. And furthermore, we've got a new producer, we've got a new studio, and hopefully the production quality is much more palatable and enjoyable. So without further ado, here's Luther himself, the man, the myth, the legend. Oh, sweet. That's a great intro. There we go. Natural.
Okay.
So, welcome to another episode of OxPod, Conversations with Students at Oxford University. And today, once again, we have Luther. Luther, would you like to say hi?
Hello, although you probably haven't seen my face because I don't know how you upload this. To be fair, I should listen to the podcast.
This is, well, phenomenal. We'll finish recording now and then you can listen to the podcast before it's too late to keep recording now. It's good. We're once again changing the format. We're trying to keep it more professional. The video quality should be better. The audio quality should be better, in theoretically. New mic as well. Same model as before. Previous one, lost on a train.
It looks professional.
It does. This newer, cleaner. We've got a phenomenal producer in the background. He's signaling that we should cut to an ad. This one has been brought to you by Athletic Grid. Okay. So how's it going?
How's it going? I don't know. I didn't know what we were going to talk about. I kind of just came here, cycled here. I'm not used to cycling in Oxford, to be fair. Speaking of cycling in Oxford, you've been cycling for like ages since you came here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that everybody cycles to eight. Well, like, it feels like owning a bicycle in Oxford shrinks the city to the degree that you can access places quickly rather than plan ahead and really block them out. So in a way, I guess it enables impulsiveness because you can just like go to the store and so on. Ryan as well doesn't go in for bikes yet, and it can be done, but yeah, I don't know how I do without my bike. But you're new to it. And how has term been for you? You do any? We should mention Luther is a second-year experimental psychologist, and
same as you actually.
Same as me.
Yeah.
And how has it been for you this term?
I mean, we've done a week. We haven't done much. Like usually at the start of term, I feel like it's so easy because it's like the introductory lectures, and they ease you in. They make you have like some sort of sense of security. You're like, this term's gonna be easy. It's gonna be easy. Then they hit you with like 100 slides in one lecture, and you're like, oh, this is why I was so tired at the end of lectures for the entirety of like last term.
And then it's too late to back out because it's like already in.
You're already in. You can't.
That's how they get you.
Yeah. That's why we should write pre-notes, like some of my friends. Although I do not do this.
How do you feel about pre-notes? Like,
I should do it. I think I should do it. It sounds like it's a really useful thing, but it probably takes up a lot of time. So you probably have to sacrifice either sleep or social life to be able to do that. But it does seem like the strat, considering we have exams in like 3-4 months also.
Oh yes, this is exams. It'll be fine. So we're aiming to do one OxPod episode a term now. Record on Sundays and hopefully we'll be up by Monday, Tuesday. Sorry.
I guess this is the only...
at least one, but hopefully 8.
Okay.
We've already achieved our minimum plan. It's only up from here. Hoping to do one a week. And if we do it that way, then theoretically, those listening in can offer feedback to those of you that know myself and Luther personally. and we can integrate that feedback. So if there's anything in the podcast format that doesn't tickle your fancy, too bad. You need to get with the program.
Too bad, just listen.
Keep listening. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting that the principal at my college, shout out to Professor Jane Shaw, said to me that term is kind of like being in New York and getting on the subway and thinking that you're going one station, but then you end up on the express and you need to go all the way to Spanish Harlem before you can get out and then go back to where you wanted to go initially. With respect to pacing yourself and how, first 2 weeks you can go guns blazing, 7 days a week, do all the super hardcore work, channel the Ali Abdal, and then suddenly you're tired and you're sort of communing with the spirit of Oxford term, and you're like, I want a break. And then term is like, so anyway, more deadlines, right? You're like, oh God, I have no energy. So here's some more assignments. And it just builds and builds and builds. So you really have to just sort of know what's coming. And we're almost at the halfway point of the degree. And I still don't feel like, at the beginning I thought by the halfway point, I'll have all my ducks in a row, super prepared, know what's coming. Theoretically, yeah, but we don't do theoretical psychology, we do
experimental
and
psychology.
We are the experiments. It feels that way.
Although we're not the experiment, because we are the last people on this kind of course that we're doing, so technically there's been like decades of this exact same course throughout the years, and then suddenly they've changed up for the year below, which is interesting actually. They should have done it sooner, in my opinion.
Really?
I mean, like, if the course has been the same for decades, and there's been, like, research that has changed psychology as a whole, and they haven't changed the course too much, then, like, maybe there's a bit of a problem there. I don't know. What do you think?
Maybe they were planning on doing it, and then COVID sort of threw a wrench into the works, because I can't think of... You have to ask yourself, why now? Why is it specifically 2022 to 2023, like, the new cohort that are doing a different programming language, doing their exams in Trinity rather than in Hillary, like the lawyers do. All of these design changes. My only sort of hypotheses would be that someone in the faculty has either left to a different university or passed away, and so there's a different methodology.
Maybe.
Or this has been a long time coming, and maybe the online exams were finally sort of this proof for whomever was spearheading the change to say, look, things can change. But yeah, things are slow to change in Oxford, and maybe that's a good thing in some ways, because trends come and go, and it's hard to tell whether or not some new idea, whether it's a movie, a novel, a song, a methodological approach to teaching experimental psychology, all of those things can have these hot new things, or hot new ideas that seem shiny at first glance, and then a year later everyone forgets about them. And then it's really the only way to tell if something stands the test of time is to test it.
That's true.
With time. And I think Oxford's a living embodiment of being a very successful university by many parameters, and yet, unlike many others, it doesn't necessarily style itself as keeping up with the academic Joneses. There's definitely adjustments and there's corrections and there's sort of an attention that's paid to improving, but it's done incrementally rather than with huge swings, which I don't think can be said of the Ivy League colleges, not to throw shade on them, and not that I've done my complete due diligence in analyzing their approach, but it certainly seems that way, that they are, in some respects, faster to change their curricula, and I don't know that that's always a good thing. After 50 years of researching the topic of changing curricula, but that's my hot take. I don't know. I'm never going to get invited to any of them.
I do wonder what the academic study is like at the Ivy Leagues and like that kind of stuff. Because I know in the Russell groups in the UK, like if you compare that to like Oxbridge, the method of study is completely different, especially for like psychology.
Yeah.
I mean, it's seen as like a STEM subject here, isn't it? Whereas in some other unis, it's classified as a humanity rather than a STEM subject, and it's because of the way they study it. But also like the amount of work that they get. I talked to some of my friends from other universities. They have like 2 essays a year.
Really?
Yeah, and they struggle to keep all the deadlines. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I have 2 essays this week, and I have to do this every week. But
although the format is also different in that I assume those essays are graded and that they're a bit longer.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's this idea that there's a sort of a higher degree of thoughtfulness that needs to be put into each written piece of work. Whereas we're sort of pushed to do as many as possible and then within examinations, you actually have to sort of produce that accrued experience, or hopefully accrued experience, in a very stressful setting. So you never actually really get the opportunity to sit down for a month and think about what you're writing. At most, you might get 3 or 4 days. And then in an exam setting, you get about an hour and a half, maybe an hour to think about what you're writing.
Technically, we're only meant to use an hour and a 30-minute technical time.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, there's just 30 minutes of technical time that not a single ambitious, highly motivated student is going to try to...
Next year, they're going to be sitting tests in person, so...
Oh, I don't know how I feel about that. Well, I do actually, and I don't like it. And at face value, I'm willing to admit that there's many things that initially are off-putting, but just because they're difficult or they're unfamiliar, and then once you confront them, especially if you do well, then there's the opposite bias of, well, I did well, and surely it must be a good test then. But it seems like an in-person exam for essays really adds this component of, can you retain it?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not entirely invalid. If you're in the workplace, then it's not reasonable to spend every waking moment looking things up and saying, well, at least I know where to look. Having things on command is useful. But I don't know that I would prefer that to online, where the questions are intentionally twisted in a way, like rephrased in a way that requires you to put together multiple lectures. It's not enough to just recall a bit because you have your notes. I feel like there the challenge is conceptual rather than being mnemonic. And I don't know that mnemonic ability takes precedence over conceptual ability, especially in academia. I would say that I'd rather hire, if I had a lab, I would hire someone who is proficient in concepts than someone that has a facility with mnemonics.
That makes sense. Although, in terms of the exam format, it's just like written exams at the moment. We do essays and then some like multiple choice questions at the moment, where they used to do short answer kind of stuff, but to test you on the lecture content. But I'd actually personally prefer to do a few dissertations and have that submitted as coursework, because then at least if you put in the effort, if you don't do well, it's on you. Whereas if you don't do well on the day, maybe you're sick, or maybe you just had a bad day, and then suddenly that's your whole grade isn't based on this 1 or 2 days of examination. Which maybe it works for some people, but again, in the workplace, are you just working for 1 day or 2 days, and that's these are the 2 important days? No, it's important every day.
I think about with respect to that sort of one opportunity. We get 2 opportunities because we do 40% and then 60% of our degree, which is already, I think, an improvement on the structure of traditional Oxford degrees.
Yeah, it's better than 100% in a few days.
But and you also have to ask yourself, firstly, better from whose perspective? The perspective of the undergraduate, or the perspective of that same student 20 years down the line saying, oh, I'm glad I did it this way? Because
essentially,
it brings to mind this quote from Mark Twain. This is going to be a really pretentious episode. I don't usually bring to mind Mark Twain, although maybe I do. But specifically the quote being, classic books are the books that everyone wants to have read, but no one wants to read. And there is a disconnect between wanting to have worked out for 3 years and just have the product of that. And then when you're confronted and you say, well, I want that. On a scale of 1 to 10, my desire of having a bodybuilder Schwarzenegger physique is 8 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. But then you're confronted with, okay, so here is in reality the prerequisite work, and then people are like, oh, okay, 2 out of 10. You average those out, and then, if you're not dyscalculic on air, then you can calculate that. So I think it's the same with exams. So I always try to devil's advocate my thoughts and think, if it's bad, then good. If it's good, then good. Just try to stay positive.
So it's good all the time.
This is true. Yeah, you just take the magnitude, Jocko Willink style.
Yeah,
he's doing a lot right now. Jocko, you're familiar with him, right?
Not really.
So he's a former Navy SEAL, SEAL Team 6. Yeah, and he runs a podcast. Those are fun. But his is in black and white, and he's super burly muscular. He has a co-host. And it's really, really brutal. His whole thing is he has a few mottos of discipline equals freedom. He wakes up at 4:45 a.m. every day, posts that. Yeah, bro, what I think about that, I wake up at 8 a.m. and I'm thinking I'm a Jocko in my universe.
Funny thing I used to do, which is because I procrastinated in secondary school, I used to wake up at around 4 a.m. in the morning to do my homework. It makes no sense, But like I did it and like I got good grades, but that's on the basis of procrastination also. I don't know why I did this. It was pretty insane. I wanted to play games or something at that time.
So you just sort of bootstrapped in the fact that, you know, class was going to come, and so therefore you needed to have it done within the same day.
Well, you just gotta get it done eventually. Like I could have done it the day before, but I was like, I just wanted to spend my time doing this thing. I mean, your youth doesn't last you that long, and by youth I mean your teenage years. I mean they're very fleeting, and most of your teenage years you're doing something kind of pointless. You're just kind of figuring out life or whatever you want to do. But yeah, I think I changed though after a year. The following year, I fixed up heavily, and I was like, okay, I'll do them like straight after I get them, which is what you're meant to do. But
yeah, meant to. Although yeah,
what you're meant to do really.
If it works for you, if it works for you in the long term, especially, then I've thought about how I think it was definitely Thomas Edison, and then was it Tesla? Perhaps maybe it's just because they're maybe Salvador Dali as well really experimented with their sleep schedules. And they would do these wild things like 45 minutes of work and then 5 minutes of sleep or something, but for 24 hours straight. That's the gist of it. I can't remember the exact numbers.
Didn't Einstein do this thing where he'd like nap every like so and so? No, he did this weird thing where he'd like hold a book or something and like sleep in his chair, and when he drops the book, he'll wake up. And like in those moments where he wakes up, it's like he had like moments of insight or something.
Yeah, I heard Dali did that. Yeah, as well. I've had similar experiences when I take very brief naps, and it feels like as I'm going into, what would that be? You don't drop immediately into REM. It's more like, here we go with our psych knowledge. But as you're sort of going from wakefulness to semi-sleep, or as one goes, I feel like I think very laterally, and I do definitely get these ideas that are related to what has been troubling me, but sort of feel like they're from a different person, like they've just fallen into my head because the preamble is gone. I feel like often it at least feels like there's some chain of thought and then a conclusion, whereas when I come out of a dream or when I come out of sleep, it's sudden and it feels like the chain of reasoning building up to it has been removed. It's like if I just tell you the answer to a maths problem, there it is. And it's interesting. It's interesting that seems to be a common experience. There's the benzene ring, the periodic table. These were supposedly revealed to people in a dream after they'd put in a lot of work, and then they were sort of stuck in a dead end, and then sleeping on it somehow sort of processes things more laterally. There's that popular notion that when you're asleep, your brain's reasoning, it's safe for your brain to think in a more lateral way because your muscular system is disconnected, and therefore there's no risk that you're going to embody dangerous and potentially sort of deadly ideas. Whereas when you're awake, your ideas have to be pragmatic and the way that you think is constrained, because if you suddenly have some wild idea and it's something that you've never tried before, it could be the sudden solution to your problem that you haven't been seeing, or you could just fall off a cliff or decide that you can fly, and that doesn't work out well. But in your dreams, you can decide, like, what if I could fly? What would be the consequences of that?
Then you can fly in your dreams.
I'm still not over the fact that R. Kelly wrote "I Believe I Can Fly." There's a lot of people in the past where a bit of a pivot, but there's
big pivot.
What you think about, like, I don't know why today's episode is characterized by great thinkers, but Da Vinci or perhaps Machiavelli, or Rousseau, for instance. Many people really like the ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, even if they've never read him. This idea that there's the noble savage and that people are intrinsically good at birth is going to be somebody reading philosophy that's going to tell me that I'm really bastardizing Rousseau's ideas. And to that I say, you're welcome to come on the podcast and be interviewed. But regardless, there's the Rousseauian idea that society is what makes people evil. And that permeates a lot of thinking in the West, especially people who are secular. Simultaneously, the fact that he had something like 10 children and he sent them all to orphanages and didn't really care about them because he was like, oh, society made me evil, I'm just going to sort of sleep around.
Really?
And then he was like, oh, well, good luck to them. It's society that's made me this way. People are like, well, you should dissociate the ideas from the person. But then when you come back to, can I come back to the original point I was making? I've gone on a leap here.
To be honest,
I've gone on a wild leap.
I don't know what your original point was at this point.
My original point here is that I should be taking Alpha Brain by Onnit to improve my working memory.
Oh.
But prior to the dreams, I guess it's the idea that you can have sort of that even people with whom you wouldn't agree to the 99% level, there can be things of value. And it's the same at the individual level, that chains of reasoning, which might be 99% flawed, have 1% sort of value. And maybe that's what happens when people dream and nap and sleep. I don't know. There was somebody on Huberman's podcast that mentioned, and he's an expert on sleep, wherein he's pursuing the hypothesis that sleep is the default state of all living beings.
Is that his hypothesis?
And not Huberman's, but this guest.
Okay.
That organisms evolved out of sleep. And the reason that we sleep and that many organisms sleep is because that is sort of an atavism, or that's the default state. And then eventually animals evolved to become awake more and more often. But it's sort of like there's amphibian creatures that live on land, but they have to breed in water. Then they're sort of half and half, where not all of their sort of vital functions can be performed on land. And so this researcher, if I understand them correctly, is proposing that we're the same, where the evolutionary trajectory is becoming more awake, but we're still half and half. No.
That's interesting. I think it's like, I've heard this thing about consciousness and stuff, and even like the most conscious beings. Although what exactly is consciousness is another completely different point. Where it's like, you can't really prove that anything's conscious other than ask something, are you conscious? And then say yes. But even then, like, what is it? We don't study about consciousness, do we, on our course? I don't think we do.
Might be an advanced course. It might be a philosophy and psychology thing. Producer over there, he's given us the nod. Do you guys study consciousness and philosophy? Yes. I mean, he might just be an apparition. Could be a hallucination. Yeah, I might just be a brain in a jar right now. But my phenomenology confirms that that's not true. And sometimes subjective experience is better than objective experience, I would say, or collectively apprehensible phenomena. I'm really losing people here with the polysyllabic. Big words, bad. Let's go back.
You do use a lot of big words, but I think that's just the nature of how you speak.
Perhaps.
I don't know. Where do you pick this up? Like, how do you just like speak in like really long words? I don't do this like naturally.
You get to the point, and when you communicate, your aim is to make sure that the person you're speaking with understands what you mean.
Yeah.
Delivers a message. I just hope to impress. I give these like really long words. Half the time I'm just like, something's going on. I think, in seriousness, I used to get very obsessed with defining words because I prefer to read electronic than physical. For a lot of reasons, the way that it feels and page turns, but also the fact that you can define any word. And I used to get quite obsessive about knowing every word in a paragraph. Because there's some statistic that, I don't know how this was operationalized, but that most adults in the English-speaking world, and maybe in America, when they read, there's a certain percentage of words in every page that they just don't know, or that they half know. So that in context, they can figure it out, but if you ask them, hey, how would you define this? No clue. And that really irked me, and I thought, well, words sort of define a large part of how we think, and also they're almost the primary determinant, if not the only determinant, of how others can understand how we think. So perhaps making sure that I know as many words as possible and that I know them precisely is a really important thing. But the other side of that coin is that there's often a much simpler word than the first one that comes to mind. And that's a real struggle. But I definitely think that to the degree that one has a wider vocabulary and uses it wisely, is very effective.
That brings me to a point where I'm not very good with vocab. My vocabulary is like pretty limited, somewhat anyways. It's gotten better since coming to Oxford and having to read like 1,000 articles because they just use like the most ridiculous language.
Even for me, it's a bit out there.
But
very parsimonious of you.
It is. I saw only parsimonious like basic level. Is that what it is?
It's like stingy but Latin it. Or like very sort of Occam's razor simplified, sort of prudent, frugal, something like that.
The thing is, with some vocab, I just use it and then I don't actually know what it means. Like during the hackathon, I was on 30 minutes of sleep just because I couldn't sleep that night.
Mm-hmm.
So in the hackathon, we had to learn some R codes for statistics. It was 9 hours, right? It's something like that. 6 to 9 hours of just coding, and it was kind of like school, like a school trip. That's what it felt like, anyways.
Yeah, it went from sounding amazing, Oxford student, 9 hours of coding, to like, yeah, so we ate on the lawn and there was like a lecture, and then like we all held hands and went to a room and ate like mashed potatoes and milk, and then like we sat down and they were like, behold, our studio, you can use this to define a function.
Yeah. Anyways, though, during that day, I was like, I just said like so confidently, like I drank some coffee and I was like, oh guys, I'm so livid right now. Like thinking it meant energetic.
I'm so livid.
No, literally. And then everyone was like, are you okay? And I was like, why are you guys so concerned about me? I'm so livid right now. But then they were like, it just means you're pissed off. I was like, oh.
There's an exploratory element, you know. There is a balance between, because I think that just looking through fiction, non-fiction, or even a dictionary to accrue words is not a natural way of doing it. The way people learn to walk is that they stumble, and even though it's usually treated as a pretentious thing to use words in a sentence that you don't know, if it's done too often, it can definitely produce the wrong impression. But I think that occasionally trying something out is the natural way that it's done.
I mean,
and
now
being
I know what
humble.
it means.
Yeah, well, there you go, and you've remembered it for life. I still remember when I was in a music theory class, and to be clear, I was very bad at music theory.
I hate music theory.
And I signed up for it just because I was like, music sounds cool.
It's fun to an extent, I'd say.
Well, it's fun if you know what you're doing, and I certainly didn't. And in the first day, there were kids in there who were pitch perfect and who had played 5 instruments. They were very talented. I played jazz piano for a good like 45 minutes collectively, and I knew that there was.
I thought you were gonna say for like 5 years.
No. I'd heard that there was a treble clef, but then
you heard there was a treble clef.
Yeah, I'd heard. So I'd heard. You heard. The rumor was passed on.
Do you know what a treble clef is?
It's the one that kind of looks like that.
Yeah, but what does it mean?
Squiggly. It means the other side of the keyboard, the higher.
Okay.
Ones. You see,
okay. You need
if you go through its belly button, then you get to G. But if you go through the belly button of the other one, you get to F. And the reason I say the other one is because we had the music teacher come in, first class. I'm making it up as I go. This teacher gets in this group of kids, all of them very gifted. They went out of their way to pick music theory. At the time, this was a former self that was probably 3 standard deviations away from being conscientious on the mean. And when I got my little card of like
which way?
Unconscientious, messy. Like how is he put together, or how is he moving? How is he not?
How's he out of bed?
It's like one of those jellyfish that actually consists of multiple organisms that live independently. I was like that, but the organisms were constantly feuding and occasionally just separated. Anyway, music teacher comes in, all these genius level kids, and then me. And she's like, okay, let's start with the basics. I know it's just super boring for you guys. Writes on the board, BASS. And she's like, okay, so what's this?
Bass.
And me, I'm like, bass!
No, you did not.
Sorry that. I hope that didn't clip. It clipped? All right, well... I said, welcome back. It clipped when I said it the first time. Bass.
Why?
Because I played Animal Crossing at some point, and
it was like
I knew about the fish, and I was like, they must be pronounced the same way.
Oh my god!
It's such a
Did
simple...
you actually say this?
Yeah. And I just remember that
you picked
everybody...
music theory.
Yeah, and everybody else laughed, including the teacher. Like initially, she was holding back, but then she just couldn't. And honestly,
why did you pick music theory? I don't understand.
It said okay, so I got my reasoning was this. I got the elective sheet, right? And my parents at the time were busy, and like, they did a lot of great things for me, but at the time, they had their own thing to go, and so I full responsibility. This is on me. I had the elective list, and I don't think they were really like, pick what you want, and I was like, music sounds cool, photography probably, I don't know, maths maybe, history sure. I remember that was my thought process. Damn. I just picked that out, and then I was like, oh, actually that influences what subjects I'll be having. That's what that was about. I was just highlighting things that I saw, like the words that I liked. So let this be a lesson to those of you listening who are interested in studying at Oxford University. If you ever think, I'm not organized, I hardly remember the difference between a treble clef and a bass clef, know that I didn't know the difference between a treble clef and a bass clef. So, you're never...
A bass clef.
You're never too far away from... Yeah, it was definitely... Yeah, I still think that you definitely have to shift your mindset from saying, for instance, I want to become someone who works out, to just saying, I already am someone who works out, and I do work out. Having that mental separation of negative traits that you use to characterize your former self, I think usually it's more productive to keep them there. Because I'm very dissatisfied with certain ways that I acted in the past. Yeah. But, to quote Jocko again, regret is only, to paraphrase, regret is only useful to the degree that it teaches and that it motivates. If it demotivates or it prevents you from learning, then it needs to leave. Or, it cool, but there's a different job for it. And it's and everybody knows that when they hear it. It's like this Socratic idea that, certain forms of knowledge are just remembering things that you already knew to be true. It feels like that, especially for things that really are sort of profound ideas. I don't know do you share that it doesn't necessarily have to be a religious truth, it can even be a scientific truth. But when something is there's this type of information where it feels like you knew this already, you just didn't have the words to articulate it. And then somebody says it and you're like, you ever it falls into place?
Probably. I mean, I think everyone's had some sort of deep thoughts that maybe haven't completely they haven't really thought about it. They just kind of had a side thought, and then they kind of think this thing, they don't really understand it, and someone explains something to them, they're like, oh, I actually kind of resonate with that. For example, Stoicism. I didn't know this was a thing until do you know what Stoicism is?
Yeah. To some degree.
Yeah, it's a very practical use of philosophy, whereas you can only control what you can control. So only focus on those that you can control, because thinking about the things that you can't control kind of brings you into this spiral of just
Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is a powerful book. Yeah.
But although I didn't know this was a philosophy until I read up on it, I was I've actually thought this for a few years now. Although there was a point at which I had to fix up from me before. I don't know. Do you have a point in time where you kind of became conscious of what you were doing? I have a very specific point in my life.
I'm working towards that. I'm really trying. Someday I'll awaken from the stupor and the fugue that I find myself in.
I mean, I talk to a lot of people and they're like, oh yeah, there's this point in my life where I just remember things very vividly, but I didn't have it before that point. I have something like that. I don't know if you do yourself.
Maybe a gradual awakening. I remember Jean Piaget.
That sounds very enlightenment. A gradual awakening.
More sort of when you've slept in on a Sunday and you're just you hear the alarm bell, distant, and then you just sort of slowly walking out of a bog wearing scuba or wearing the old-fashioned diver's suit, and you're slowly taking. I don't know. It's hard to say. Piaget wrote that, I think it was him, that at 4 years of age he suddenly said to himself, "I am." I'm conflating. It was Jung, and Jung used to, when he was a kid, he would sit on a boulder and he would ask, "Am I the Carl sitting on the boulder, or am I the boulder being sat on by Carl?" He was sort of toying around with this idea that there wasn't yet subject-object relationship, that everything was object, subject, subject, object. It was a subjective object or an objective subject. And then at a certain period in his life, he suddenly had this clear marker at some point. I think he talks about it exactly as being a little boy walking in the fog, and suddenly his self came out of the fog, and that he had this conscious realization of, oh, I exist, I am that I am. Speaking of, before bed last night, I whipped out Exodus. For reason, I'm slowly.
Why?
This is my second time going to church. There's a
really? I thought you've been there a few times now.
I've in childhood I'd popped in and out, but this is my second time actually going on a Sunday of my own volition. And so before bed I was reading Exodus, and there's this scene when the burning bush presents itself to Moses, and then the burning bush says to Moses that I am God, and you should tell your people that I am the God of Abraham, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And then Moses says, well, what should I tell? When they ask your name, what should I say? And then the Lord replies, I am that I am. So that was interesting. And I whipped out the translations of like Old English and Russian just to confirm.
Yeah.
And it's essentially the same idea that I am the thing that is, or no, that which exists is what I am. Yeah, something like that. But it's such an interesting. I think it comes back to that idea of realizing that, not just linguistically, but that being conscious of there being some separation between your awareness and that which you are aware of. Yeah.
So the seer behind the thinker kind of thing.
Yeah, precisely. And and to come back to your question, I'm not sure that I can really pinpoint a single moment in my childhood when that happened. It feels like a timeline where very early when I was about 4, there's these dots, there's these I remember being in kindergarten and looking up and there being a window with the blue sky. And then I thought to myself, wouldn't this be a useless memory to keep for the rest of my life? And I was like, this is such a random thing. And then I've kept it since it's burnt in. I can see it on command. And I was almost aware of the fact that it would be plugged in there. Or so the memory goes. I remember having remembered, not the thing itself. It's been so many.
That's pretty insane.
And then there's a few others. I can think of a few episodes from kindergarten. And then as I go through time, there's more and more and more. But there was some person I was reading about in that Oliver Sacks book that's very... Also, if you're looking to do interviews for experimental it's now neuroscience and psychology at Oxford. The Oliver Sacks book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, very cool, but every single person reads that. So read it, but read something else as well and talk about the something else. Anyway, I cracked that open because I hadn't read it before.
I read half of it and then I couldn't be bothered to finish it.
There's that girl or that woman who has a perfect, a calendaric or a calendar-like memory where you can tell her 15th of January 2005 and she can tell you exactly how her day went. And she says that, or in the book, Sachs wrote that there's a great burden on her because she has to carry the totality of her memory with her everywhere she goes, and it clouds her awareness of the present moment.
It's interesting. I guess it takes up so much cognitive capacity that you can't really focus your attention outside of that kind of space. Yeah.
It's kind of like the study of pain, where one would assume that there's many things where we say, oh, I wish I didn't have pain. But then infants who are born without pain, I'll spare the listeners the details, but it gets pretty grim because of... I'll say it this way round. If an infant does feel pain, they don't have very good limb control. You're sort of, when you're in the crib, this is sort of, the arms aren't yet even integrated as part of you. And then if you try to poke your eye or something, there's a reflex that goes between the motor neuron and your spinal cord. It doesn't even go up to the brain. It's that ancient. If you don't feel pain, that doesn't happen. So so a lot of the time, especially with exams, at the end of this term during the vacation, there'll be a lot of people thinking, if only I had a phenomenal perfect memory. But it depends on what you mean by perfect. Maybe we already have a perfect memory to the degree that it's easiest to remember the things that seem important and salient at the time. And when we have a particular experience, like a flashcard or an exam, and when we retroactively realize that something which we had not assigned sufficient salience to turns out to be very, very important, more than we thought, the next time we see it, we remember it better. It's like the testing effect. So it's like we had that whole lecture on perception might already be perfect, depending on how you define...
Well, what is perfect, right? What is perfect perception?
To what end, yeah.
These abilities sound cool, like perfect memory, like that guy who drew the picture of New York after flying over it once.
Yeah.
Although you don't know what he sees in his life, you don't know what he thinks about. Does it affect how you think? Probably, to some extent. If you see something really graphic and horrific, it'll be burnt into your brain.
That's true.
Is that really what you want to happen in your mind, from day to day?
It's interesting how things just stand out even in the present moment. I heard a lecture about, and I mentioned this morning, about the phenomenologists, how there's this entire school of thought that, broadly speaking, believes that in some circumstances your subjective experience of the world takes precedence over the things which you, myself, Ryan, and everyone else can sort of replicate like a scientific article and then say, here's where all of our phenomenologies cross over, and the thing that's at the center of 50 Euler diagram circles, that's the truth, and the rest is just bias. That's sort of the objectivist approach, whereas the phenomenologist approach, or the atomist, the phenomenologist approach would be, okay, so what's this thing that other people can't perceive? And of that, how much of it is noise and how much of it is very important signal. So it really is the case that you'll be walking through your day and suddenly you have a memory from 4 years ago that just sort of appears out of nowhere, and then you have an idea, and where does that come from? And then you have this, maybe it's like a bad memory, there's some shame, and then you think, oh, I should message someone. It just sort of floats out, or at least it's experienced that way. And then it's the same with deciding what food to eat or what book to read. Our behavioral neuroscience lecturer, Robert Murphy, and former head of the department, or current? No, sure. Head of, made the argument that that's just sort of an epiphenomenon, and that subjective experience is not verified by behavioral experiments in rodents and in humans. But
insight.
I'm not sure that it's definitely somewhat of a interesting maneuver to be an undergrad and disagree with a professor, but I think under some circumstances that might not be useful.
I think you can
disagree.
I would argue. Like there's two sides of the scale, and like he's on one side pretty heavily, where we don't really think is what he's arguing for, is that everything we do is because of we've been conditioned to act a certain way, which is why we are the way that we are. It's not because of insights or like thinking about things logically or like as a rational being, because we're not rational beings at the end of the day. We're pretty emotional most of the time, but I don't know, I'd argue against Robert Murphy. That's just because that's my view, but in an essay I'd argue for it, of course.
I've been thinking about essentially Professor Robert Murphy's claim, and I believe he's sort of amplified it or hyperbolized it a bit for the purposes of the lecture to get us to sort of really think, and it worked because I was obsessed with it over the vacation. And I was thinking, well, okay, so how can, in the light of the experiments that he's presented, wherein rats can exhibit symptoms of depression, symptoms of nausea, symptoms of positive emotion. They respond to drugs, they respond to socialization. And if you expose them repeatedly to a certain stimulus, for instance, and then you pair it with either a positive sort of a reward or a reinforcer, or a negative reinforcer and an extinction sort of, well, extinction is the absence, but you can pair something that's previously neutral with something that's already salient, and building up through these experiences you can recreate a very sophisticated model of what humans can do for essentially every function. And that evidence is then provided as supporting Robert Murphy's idea that we're sort of Descartesian automata, and that thinking isn't necessary for the explanation of human behavior. But you could say that phenomenologically, that's not what I experience. And so you could say, oh, well, other people aren't privy to that. Only you are. Maybe under the circumstances of developing a drug or a internal combustion engine, valid. But maybe under the circumstances of someone struggling with a meaning in their life, or with sort of acting in the world in a way that's more in alignment with what they'd like to do, maybe it is relevant that you're the only person who's privy to this, and therefore you're the only person that can stand to benefit from it, and you have to take responsibility for your subjective experience.
Although, if you think about it, what he's really arguing for is a deterministic approach of just like, we're born in an environment, we learn these things, and that's what makes us who we are. We don't actually decide who we are. Determinism versus free will. So it is actually more of a philosophical question, I would argue, whether or not we are beings with rational thought, or whether we're just like a consequence of our experiences. So who knows, maybe we are just rats running around.
The two arguments I'd have for that, and it's a very, very old debate, would be firstly, if you act in a way that presumes that there is free will, usually it works out better because you feel greater positive emotion, there's meaningfulness to what you do, and other people can respond to you and predict what your behavior will be. And secondly, my knowledge of quantum physics is very, very superficial. However, at the very least, you have the uncertainty principle that to the degree that you know the velocity of an electron, you reduce your certainty of its position, and to the degree, and vice versa. And there is a long history of people falsely projecting insight from particle physics and quantum physics into the material, sort of everyday world. There's certain ideas that somehow Einstein's theory of relativity is in support of the postmodern constructivist view that everything is relative. That's not what Einstein meant. And, well, so I understand it. There is a history of of appropriating ideas from physics and then misplacing them. However, it seems that determinism, from a book by Gleek, I forget his first name, very good, Chaos, big recommend. There he asserts that determinism at one level of analysis is just not viable because there's no way, as we understand it, for us to have every single variable ever available to us. Because one of the central tenets of determinism is that if we could only measure a single slice of time exhaustively, then every previous and subsequent slice of time could be predicted with 100% accuracy. But then what quantum physics indicates to some degree is that that's not, there's an uncertainty that's baked in. And no matter how precise your instruments are, we might find out tomorrow or in 100 years that there's some instrument we can't even envisage. But as far as we know, that determinism doesn't work. I was reading Feynman's biography by Gleich as well, and James, and Feynman was working on this. Richard Feynman was working on the idea that to explain the movement of electrons, it's almost as if the electron is able to preempt. You're personifying, but the electron is able to consider every possible position that it could be in the future, and based on that knowledge, adjust its movement. And if you pretend that that is what's happening, and then you create an explanation based on that supposition, you get an explanation that describes your observations. So it's like, an electron doesn't think or predict, but he grappled with that idea. And I think that at a more sort of scientific level, that is a knock against determinism. And then so there's like the scientific perspective on it, but there's also the phenomenological / subjective perspective that it just feels wrong. Yeah. And I think that the 20th century is a phenomenal example of when people say, oh, well, just because it feels wrong doesn't mean that it's untrue. Fair enough, sometimes. Saying that, maybe somebody believes that they're unhealthy because the world is conspiring to make them unhealthy and not because they're not taking responsibility for their health. And that if you tell them, oh, no, it's up to you, and they feel bad, just because it feels bad doesn't mean it's a falsehood. But also, just because it feels bad doesn't mean it's not a falsehood. Yeah. And if it feels bad for years and years and years, and if you guide your behavior on the assumption that there is no free will, and it makes you miserable, perhaps that misery is a physiological indication that it's not a good idea.
Yeah. Although arguably someone who believes that free will doesn't exist might just then think, well, I can't then believe that free will exists because I'm predisposed to believe that it doesn't exist. And if I were to then believe that free will exists, I might be because...
So it's like a linguistic trap.
Yeah, it's literally like, well, that's why it's such a debate. It's just like, it's an infinite debate that can't really be solved. Some would argue it can be solved because of very strong views. I'm in the middle. I tried to be a compatibilist, but it doesn't really work, to be honest.
I had an idea when I was in the food hall here that sort of, again, sort of to the point of coming out of nowhere. When I sat there and I said to someone, what if it isn't, I think I've said this before, but perhaps not on the podcast, what if it isn't the case that there is all free will and no free will, but that you can lose and gain free will? And that because you see people that have committed, there are people who are in bad circumstances like homelessness with essentially who are dealing with random tragedy that's befallen them. But I think we can all recall people who have dug themselves into a hole by their own doing. And the fact that they know that it's by their own doing makes it all the worse. And this, I think, is one of the few ideas which I could really say sort of came to me and wasn't something that I just sort of parroted from a book. but maybe you have to earn more free will, and maybe you can forfeit it if you choose to give in to addictions or things that you already know to be bad. And so when a person goes the whole way and kills someone or goes into a full-blown addiction or does something else, it's almost like they've given up 99 or even 100% of their free will. They really do become that sort of zombie that's just pulling a lever on a slot machine in a casino. And because and do they have control over the situation? Maybe they used to, and then they gave it all up. And then through a lot of sort of doing the things that you don't want to do, but that are conducive to what you think is a forthright goal, maybe that earns you free will. And the more free will you earn and you sort of accrue it, it's like sort of muscle mass where it can be lost and it has to be, you can lose it faster than you gain it, but if you slowly build it, then that allows you to interface with the world. And this hypothesis of mine, or even my theory, is substantiated by zero experimental evidence and pure conjecture, and based on our boy Willie James, 1890, absolute slapper of a psychologist. Sometimes conjecture is pretty ballin'. Because everybody's like, oh no, you can't be conjecturing. Where's your actual objective measure? Where's your apparatus? Where's your instrument? And then what happens? Then we have lectures here in Oxford from very esteemed scientists who would never in their life just write what they believe and say that it's like, that is already valid. And they quote William James. They quote our boy Willie James. Everything, attention, memory, development. The infant is assailed by a buzzing, whirring, overwhelming experience of the senses. Maybe we need to go back to that. Maybe just for 20 years, we just the essay prompts become, write what you think because you feel that way.
I mean, people still do that to this day, although I do think William James's work was impactful because we had no hypotheses prior, really. We had no solid hypotheses to test. And the scientific method, we never really employed it in psychology up until somewhat recently, even
last Tuesday was a great breakthrough.
But I mean, just without his hypotheses, maybe they wouldn't have been tested. So maybe this is why he's so influential, because the ideas led to the testing, and we found out that a lot of his ideas were pretty valid not really in the basis of his brain, but also you could argue also human intuition does have something, because we do live our lives. There's a lot of experiences and statistical learning maybe from our experiences which might lead to that kind of intuition, such as the ones that William James had, or maybe he's just an incredibly smart guy. I don't know.
Yeah, there's so many hyper intelligent people that produce so many profound ideas and sort of structures of ideas that people still unpack those long after they're gone. And you could lament the fact that not every single human being is like that, but one could also say that we're barely able to make sense of the sort of geniuses, for lack of a better, that's a problematic term, but and not in a political way, but that it's imprecise. It's a very low resolution term. But if we had any more, maybe our culture would fall apart. Because it exerts so much stress. It puts a massive strain, because our culture, if we had to think about every single heartbeat, we'd just die immediately. There has to be a certain percentage of the behaviors that we enact, and ultimately an idea will lead to a behavior if it's a valid idea, I would argue. And so there's only so much that you can be conscious of. A lot is autonomous, if not the majority, depending on how you count it. And so whenever we have someone who, for whatever reason, is neurophysiologically or spiritually wired to be very attentive and very capable of taking things that people just assumed as truth and examining them in a way that hasn't been done before, provided that they're heard and their ideas are disseminated, people have to think, what am I doing? It's like when you're learning to ride a bike, if you look at your feet, you're more likely to fall over, because now you're overthinking it. You're conscious of something that needs to be left to the unconscious process. It can be dealt with better. And so I think that people nowadays lament that there was a Nature article of the fact that even though that after peer review became popular in the 1960s, the amount of revolutionary science, and I forget how they defined it, or like highly disruptive science, has not increased. And what was actually asked on the thread where I saw that posted was, well, has the actual amount decreased? No, it stayed the same, but it's sort of the amount of sort of revolutionary, disruptive, paradigm shifting science is sort of more or less stable, and then the amount of sort of hypothesis testing science has gone up, where it's sort of using methods to extend incrementally. We all right there? Yeah. Yeah, so maybe that's a good thing. People like lament, why aren't there 50,000 more Da Vinci's than there were previously? Population has gone up, nutrition has gone up, education's more widely available. Surely you'd think that there would be more Nietzsche's and more Dostoevsky's and more Kierkegaard's and more Socrates's. And then you have this pessimistic argument, though it's because of we're being dumbed down and people aren't being sort of forced to invent syllogisms all over or write the Republic or something like that. Maybe, but I think quite highly of human beings and at least the potential within every human being.
There's definitely a lot of potential.
Yeah, and human beings are we're capable of withstanding so many brutal things. It's really shocking as to how much sort of suffering and tragedy people can live through.
Have you read Viktor Frankl's book?
Yes, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
I'm a great
It's a really
admirer
good
of that book. Yeah, and you read that and you think, oh my God, it's just like, I think the Olympics are important for many reasons, and one of them is that you see an Olympian perform something and you think, well, they spent 20 years working towards that, but they're human. They're the same. At one level of analysis, they're just like me. On another, they're very different. Yeah. But it's sort of one foot on the platform, one on the train. If they're kind of like me, then maybe I could be kind of like them. And not necessarily going for gold if you're already 40 and there's some athlete that's, it's one of those human endeavors that you have to start early. But it can transfer. Humans can generalize. We're capable of generalizing one kind of learning onto another. Yeah, so that's all to say that perhaps it's maybe a good thing that we don't have so many groundbreaking individuals within every domain because we're already at capacity. I'd like to be proven wrong. The more people that come up with brave and exciting new ideas, the better. But it could be just like, people wishing that they didn't have pain. And then when you actually observe that, it doesn't work out too well. Maybe if we could somehow run a simulation where every single person is endowed with this capacity to reformulate and question everything in our culture simultaneously, it would be very hard to function.
And there'd also be some sort of revolution if that was the case, because if everyone's thinking at that level, then people would want things to be different. Technically these days people want things to be different, but they don't think on it too much that they'll actually take action on it.
Yeah, that was definitely a thing that happened in 1917 that is still playing out not too well. I was talking to the pastor at the church here, and it was again one of those things that just sort of came out where I said, people, this is a bit dark, but it bears saying, people around my age in 1917, took the Tsar of Russia, the Romanov family, including the Tsar, into a basement of this nondescript hotel where they were being detained. And people my age shot him, his wife, and children that were 5. Yeah. And if you do subscribe to the idea that, whether it's secular or religious, that committing these sort of amoral things comes with this price that might not be immediately apparent, but it comes in like a Indiana Jones log. There's a delay, but it's coming, or a boulder. I think we're not... I'm going to make some friends and I'm going to make some enemies by saying this, but I think that the Russian Federation is still... paying for that. We inherit the sins of our forefathers. That happened, and that log is rather hefty, and it's still only in some part of its trajectory. And I'm wrong about 99% of the things I say, and then completely wrong about the final percent. But that's the way that it seems to me, and it makes me realize that we have to. There's invisible strings attached to everything we do. Oh yeah. And so we have to make sure they become visible when the thing that they're attached to on the other end rears its ugly head. Yeah. Then but all of these all these ideas come out of like books and podcasts and discussions. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that they're not discussed in school or university? Morality is something that is now tiptoed around because, well, who are you to say this? Who are you to tell the kids how you see it? Don't know.
I mean, eventually, most kids learn morals from probably their parents, right? Like, or at least some figure.
Some do.
Some do, yeah. I mean, arguably though, like some kids who've had like really harsh upbringings then have like the morals are not that high because they're like, oh, if they're doing that, then I'm going to do it too. But then you have those select few that completely change their morals. Like, I don't want to be like that. I mean, they're called like the stop generation is what people call them.
The stomp generation.
Stop generation.
Stop.
As in like if their parents have done this to them and it's been going on for generations most of the time. Like their parents did it to them, their parents did it to them, but they're like, I'm gonna stop, and then like in this generation, it's gonna be the one it's not gonna happen to. Also, there is this thing that's kind of like epigenetic, maybe.
That's fascinating. Like the methylization of DNA throughout experience.
Yeah, but also, like for example, Holocaust survivors, like their kids, like there's some stuff with like sleep deprivation and like they don't get enough sleep. Same with like people who've like the ancestors of people who've gone through slavery. There's like so many studies about like why can't they sleep as much as people who have not been through this.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so literally like the past trauma from like years ago, like decades ago even, like still affects them to this day. It's like generational trauma is what they call it. And it's pretty insane because it just makes it like somewhat harder for them to like become successful because they have some like disadvantages due to like this past trauma, which is insane how it goes through.
We inherit the sins of our forefathers.
I mean, epigenetics also, we don't know much about it yet. Like, we're still figuring stuff out about it. Which is, it's really cool though. What I just learned about, like, your genetics can change. Well, not change, but you know what I mean. Like, the expression
they do. The genes become activated that were just latent within the DNA.
Technically, you had the genes, but they, like,
just
change.
They get activated. It's like because a huge portion of a DNA double helix, a lot of it is actually diseases that are blocked. So I might be wrong on this, and I probably am. But some viruses and bacteria infect you not by introducing something new to your DNA, but they go to the section of your DNA that blocks that disease and then unclicks it. And then it just sort of opens the sort of Pandora's box that was already within you. Because your immune system has this was a book written by the person that, one of the, Philip Detmar, the guy behind Korsgesagt. He wrote this huge book on the immune system and in very broad terms described that your immune system actually has a record of every possible disease that could exist. Because it takes all of the proteins and other substructures that could possibly create a pathogen within the parameters of our physical world. And so it's like combinatorical.
Do you know how it works?
That's the limit of my understanding.
I learned this slightly in biology where apparently it's like so you have all of these antigens and stuff. I forgot what they're called. I'm not even going to say
killer T cells those are the heavy hitters later on.
Yeah, but
that's like when you get the 4-star GTA thing, or the virus does. That's really your immune system is just the GTA stars.
I think they are T cells actually, but anyways, I'm not going to quote what they are exactly. But there's basically as a fetus, we have so many of these cells for different shapes, and they basically test it on our own cells, and if it activates, they basically destroy it, and they're destroyed like as soon as they're made, like in our bodies, which is why we don't attack our own cells. That's why in autoimmune diseases, it's like when your cells attack yourself because there's something that's gone wrong with that mechanism. But ideally, we'd have like something for every single shape of like bacterial pathogen or anything foreign from our body, which is also why we reject like transplants. So
the default position of the immune system is destroy everything, and then it inhibits rather than
pretty much.
Oh,
which is pretty insane.
So it's anything that I don't know what the parameter like anything that's a structure, it will destroy, and then it learns that small percentage of things that should be whitelisted, and then everything else. Yeah. Oh wow.
Except in autoimmune diseases, which there is a bit of autoimmune stuff in my family. Eczema is an autoimmune actually, in some people anyways. Like it's thought to be as the skin barrier in eczema. It's like it becomes rough and stuff, so that's why they treat it with creams and stuff. But a lot of the time there is an underlying issue with the immune system that's attacking the cells to inflame it.
Wow. I know that the eyeballs, firstly, I watched this GIF that Andrew Huberman retweeted of the fetus developing and how there's the forebrain and the hindbrain, because there's sort of this, we begin life as a, kids pay attention, we begin life as a burrito tube with like a hole in it. That's what you begin as. First there's the zygote.
Does it taste good though?
Oh!
Hey,
I go to church, so I can't comment.
Going to church does not mean you can't comment.
I'm pro burrito. So it's like you have.
So you think they taste nice?
Okay, that's not what I.
Anyways.
Okay, so you have the burrito, and then from the burrito, I'm sure that my neurophysiology lecturers would be so proud of me. At some point, you have your the nervous system begins as this sort of spinal cordish tube, and then you have the fore and the hindbrain. They're sort of there. Then from the forebrain, which is at the forefront, the eyeballs sort of poke out through the skin, and so you can see in this developmental GIF that your eyeballs are a continuation of your forebrain, and they just poke out of your skull. What's interesting, I think this is related to the blood-brain barrier, but your immune system never gets to interact with your eyeballs from birth. And so therefore, if your immune system, people speak broadly, if your immune system discovers the existence of your eyeballs, it starts to destroy them as a pathogen. So your eyeballs have, there's some term that they have like special, they have diplomatic immunity or something, or like, I don't know, ocular immunity. There are plenipotentiaries. Yeah.
Because I did philosophy rather than neurophys.
I see. Well, you see free will and neurophys. Yeah. No, it's good.
How long has this been going on for?
These are good questions. Oh shit, we've been going on for like an hour and a half. We can cut out the cuss words because it's conversations with students at Oxford.
I don't think we did.
I've used a few. Is there like an automatic filter we can get on that, producer?
Yeah,
sir?
you have to look through it, don't you?
We can get there's a button that we can press to bleep things out. Yeah. No, but this is good. Yeah, it's been a while, and
it's not that easy to filter swear words, right?
Potentially, I mean, it's
we'll figure it out.
I mean, I could lie that I have Tourette's, but no, that wouldn't work out well. If you're a compulsive liar, then that's not society acceptable. Anyway, we should bring this to a close. This has been really good. We covered a lot. Thank you for coming.
Compared
onto the
OxPod. Look at this, guys. He's drank his water in like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
I'm still going.
Yeah,
what does that say about us as people?
It means that I've actually still got a little bit left. Got a little bit.
This would be funny if you do like
energy.
at the end of every interview, you like look at how much water's in their glass and like psychoanalyze them.
That's actually what experimental psychology. Don't let the Department of Experimental Psychology trick you with that thing on the undergraduate admissions when it says that Freud and Jung are not discussed. We're about empirical observations. Go into your interview and just talk about like the Oedipal complex and see how that works. Okay, maybe
don't do that.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Talk about the science.
Anyways.
Talking about the science, thank you so much.
Yes, I'm going to plug myself also.
Yeah, plug yourself.
At Luthers Online, Luthers, and then online, one word. Find me on YouTube. I make YouTube videos sometimes. Maybe in the next year. Hopefully.
Yeah,
if we have no work to do over summer.
If you release a YouTube video then and somebody follows it, it's like, well, I guess I need to give more vision. It's like, yeah. But yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to our lovely producer, Ryan. He is the next Jamie Vernon, but bigger, better, healthier, stronger, and also mysteriously off camera.
You guys don't know what he looks like.
Yeah.
Maybe you can search his name and you can find out. But
yeah. Ryan. No surname, just
exactly.
like the royal
family.
It's
just Ryan.
But not related to the royal family, importantly. But yeah, this is the new OxPod. Thank you to those listening. Hopefully the audio quality, the production quality is much more to your liking. And we're looking forward to producing many more episodes in a shorter time frame. If you want to be on the OxPod and you know myself or the two lovely gentlemen associated with the podcast, then please do let us know. Send me an email, send me a DM, shout at me on the street while I'm going to the grocery store. I'm going to regret saying that. But yeah, and also, so it's super exciting. Yeah.
Remember to subscribe, follow, or whatever it is on this platform that you're listening in on to...
Oh yeah, give us a rating on the Apple Pod, the Spotify, all the things.
Ratings, comments, all of that.
You know where it's at. All the things. Do the things that are cool. It would really help us out if you click the buttons that do the good thing wherever this podcast is available, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube or your Walkman. There's a new Sony Walkman out, and maybe we can get on that potentially. All right, this concludes the first OxPod episode of Hillary Term 2023. Luther, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Yeah. This is like one of those photos where you like